started. All right, good afternoon. My name is Candace Mott, and I'm your president of DC ACTE, and welcome to our May 20th professional development. And so our agenda today we'll have our introduction of our speaker today with a short presentation and questions and sharing. We will do our usual social activity cahoots. Congratulations to our winners from last month. Quick share of our upcoming events, and we will close it out. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Valentine Davies so that he can do our presentation of our speaker today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, President Mott. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a phenomenal speaker today. She comes to us through Trinity University. She's the assistant dean at the School of Education there, a wealth of knowledge and expertise in the space that we're focusing on last couple of months, the AI space. Today's title of her presentation is focusing on lines of code, from lines of code to communities of inquiry, understanding generative AI in the context of pre-K-12 classrooms. Everyone remembers last PD session, we had a fundamentals of what is AI, what does it mean, how does it look, from Professor Ortiz from the University of Alaska. Professor Orellana is now going to take it to another level to really start to drill down to give us a better understanding and a better perspective on this aspect of AI, especially as it relates to K-12, pre-K-12 classroom space. So I want to introduce Professor Orellana to the DC ACTE community. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you for that amazing introduction. I don't often get introduced so eloquently, but I greatly appreciate it. And way to start me off, boost me up before we spend this time talking today. And so, as was shared, I'm currently the assistant dean in the School of Education at Trinity Washington University. There, I teach a number of our courses, my two favorites being our Foundations of Education course and also our Technology and Education, where we explore some of these ideas, one from the standpoint of just being an instructor in a context where now in society, learners have this amazing tool, but then also empowering the teacher candidates at Trinity to think about how these topics apply to their practice. Previously, I taught at the University of Maryland, an instructional technology course there, where, again, we are really thinking about it as how are we leveraging these tools for learning for ourselves as professionals who are always seeking to grow and develop, but also for the learners that we support. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And so, as you said, we are really going to take what is a highly complex technical subject and think about it from the lens that we all share, different lenses that we all share as members of communities of inquiry. Communities of inquiry being the classroom and facilitators of learning in that context, but also communities of inquiry being an entire industry of professionals who are now trying to figure this thing out. And so we're going to start with talking about technology generally, really operationalizing what, before we think about the impact of generative AI on education, what technologies are we using? We are going to talk through the techno-panic timeline. Again, you cannot engage with any resource about generative AI without getting a really strong sense that there are two ends of the spectrum in terms of how society will respond to it. And we're going to talk about teaching with generative AI, both exploring it as a tool, but also topics themselves of instruction. And we're going to close out with facilitating conversations with regarding a generative AI, and then open the floor up for some exploration and some questions. And so first I want us to engage in a little bit of a thought experiment. This can be silent to ourselves. What are technologies that we use in education, and how do we use them? So let's take about 30 seconds and just think through what those technologies currently are and how we use them. And my teacher weakness was wait time, so I'm very much reliant on a timer. And so if you want to, feel free, if thoughts are flowing abundantly, and feel free to come off of mute or just share with the group, what are some technologies that we are currently using? So some of the things that you might consider are our student information systems. Those are technologies that we're leveraging in education. Maybe immediate applications, different applications. Maybe immediately your mind goes to learning management systems, or maybe it is, maybe you have digital timesheets and that's the bane of your existence, recording to the moment, what time you enter the building, what time you leave, putting in all of that leave at the end of the pay session. And so generally when we think about technology as it exists, and this can be pre Chat GPT, but we use technology in fundamentally different ways. And this is not by any means a like dictionary definition, but we can use these terms to kind of operationalize what is kind of a two distinct pools of our technology usage. So you hear the phrase educational technology, you hear instructional technology, you might hear academic technology, and depending on what you read or what you're watching, they all mean the same thing or they mean different things. For the purposes of this presentation, I want you to think about educational technology as the broader use of technology in education. And here, education, let's think about the industry of education. And so when we think about that, obviously there are people who work in education who are not teachers. So we have COOs, chief operations officers, who are working in education, and the tools that they use to facilitate the educational process, like managing a budget, those fall under the realm of educational technology. And so think about like a broader use of technology that encompasses all of those aspects of the educational process, whether it be hiring, whether it be facilities, all of those are in the support of education. And when you look at the platforms, they will look slightly different because they're designed for that context. And we will say instructional technology is a piece of that. They're the specific tools, techniques, and the strategies that we use to support learning. And so when you can think about both, I would put like a student information system on the educational side, educational technology. But the particular LMS, which some places they're the same, but some places they're different, that's an example of that instructional technology. And so with that in mind, when we think about the impact of generative AI on education, the industry, we can look at it at different levels. Are we talking about a very specific context of learning within the classroom, within a course, or are we talking about potentially the impact on teacher quality if all teacher resumes are going through are being filtered out with some sort of generative AI tool that is used in the human resources in that work. And so we can really think about it on both levels. Today, Obviously, we'll focus more on instructional technology, but I want us to be aware of that broader landscape because those also are important questions we should be asking of the industry, of our school leaders. It's what type of questions we should be asking about the platforms we adopt in all of those contexts. And so one of the things I think can be very true, and I've seen this in my own personal experience as a human learning and growing in this society, I think we can learn a lot about and draw a lot of predictions about the future based on where we've been. And so when we think about the impact generative AI might have, let's think about examining the track record that our society has with technological innovation. And it's a long track record. It is a long track record. And one of the things, my particular strand of research is on digital reading, specifically the concept that how we support students and learners in engaging with digital text has to be fundamentally different. We navigate those spaces differently than print. And so if we are not very intentional on how we support students with reading on devices or reading digital medium, then we might not be preparing them as effectively as we can for the future that awaits in a world where very few households have printers anymore. And so most of their reading is digital. But if you try to apply print reading strategies to the digital medium, sometimes there can be a disconnect. And so one of the things I love to talk about is the response to the printing press. 1545, that was technology. That was as groundbreaking as what we're seeing with generative AI now. And one of the sentiment is that the printing press would make society dumber. And we see that particular narrative throughout history, that this technological innovation, in every way that it's supposed to be a support to society, it will have a negative impact on us. And again, where we are with generative AI, like we're simply speculating now. But one of the reasons why they said the printing press would make society dumber is because we didn't have to have the information in our minds anymore. We could print it, we could share it widely, and if information is more easily accessible, does it impact the value that it has? And so you definitely see this parallel with as information and as the power that information has gets democratized and more widely accessible, there is a fear. And now you'll see that there is always a parallel with some of the gatekeeping that then happens around what is that information. And so the printing press would make us dumber. Information could be in books and not in our heads, and society would suffer for it. Then when we kind of zoom forward, television is going to make us dumber. We are not focusing, we're reading less. And continuing on, we see this long history of techno panic. As technology innovates, as new tools and as processes around our living get optimized, there is going to be a negative impact on the cognitive power of the individual and society. And we see this, we saw it after World War II when automation, specifically assembly line automation, was threatening positions. And there was the assumption that there's going to be millions of workers displaced by the automation rise. They use the phrase automation depression. We also saw it in the early 2000s again with automated software now. And this, I like to use this graphic as now there's this competition for work. And this projection was that by 2022, 75 million workers will be replaced by machines and or automated software. Ultimately, we saw it as less of an impact, and we actually observed somewhat of a neutral impact, because as there are, yes, automation does make certain tasks make it so humans don't have to perform certain tasks, but automation and technological advancement also creates new work. And so one of the resources I love to explore, and this can be a thought experiment at your own time, around this time in the 2000s was when this website, willrobotstakemyjob.com, was developed in response to kind of some of that fear mongering. And one of the things that this resource does, and I always just find it very interesting to explore with students, is it calculates the risk of automation for particular positions. Moderate risk, high risk. But if you take a second, and I'll put the URL in the chat, if you take a second and explore, one of the things you'll notice is they do a decent job of essentially justifying what characteristics of the work or the occupation make it at risk for automation. And so feel free, I put the URL in the chat, take a second to explore. If you go to the website, you can type in a job. Most time when I explore this with my students, they type in teacher, it's what we do, or you can select something random. They do have a random occupation option as well. But take some seconds to explore. And one of the patterns that you'll see in your exploration is jobs that require problem solving, creativity, and originality are the jobs that are less threatened by automation. And even though here we're talking about softwares for automation, this was not inclusive of this generative AI era, I also believe that those are the jobs that are going to be at low risk for having a robot take your job. And so one of the things that we see with this panic, and again, I would say, will robots take my job, was probably at this, I would say it was probably at this peak height of hysteria right here. Someone was scared, and that's why they developed this website. But when we think about this techno-panic timeline, what we always see is this kind of cycle relive itself again and again. Whether it is the printing press, whether it is the calculator. Again, when calculators were invented and you didn't have to do complex mental math, we saw a similar cycle. And so where would you put yourself? Would you put yourself in these trusting beginnings? Do you feel like you're at the point of panic in your practice? Are you feeling completely lost with how to measure learning anymore? If everyone has access to this thing and no one has to do any work, if they learn how to use these different generative AI tools, are you at that point of panic? Is it rising? Would you feel like you're at the height of hysteria where you can't even define what learning and teaching is anymore because everything is a free-for-all and you can never know or attribute original thought to anyone anymore? Or do you feel yourself kind of coming down? Have you, maybe through exploration, maybe through working with learners or kind of integrating these practices in your own personal life or professional life, do you feel like you're deflating? Are you feeling like maybe similar to a lot of people, and I see some comments in the chat, are you feeling like, you know what, this isn't actually as powerful as I thought it would be? Are you at that point of practicality? And then have you completely moved on from it? Are you saying this is just something else that will come and go? All of those places are valid. And again, while techno panic, there's definitely a negative connotation for that. I'll own it. But what we see of this cycle is this is a human experience of digesting and operationalizing and figuring out this new unknown to us thing. And so what we want to do is think about where we are in that techno panic cycle, where society is, because us as individuals, by nature of signing up to be here today, maybe you fit in that category of early adopter. But what impact will generative AI have on the industries that our students will enter? And so if you've moved on and you're like, this is not that big of a deal, society is no better or worse for it, that's fine. But recognize that that might not be where society on scale is at. And so as we support ourselves and support our learners with kind of figuring out this new way forward, we will always have to balance our individual perspective with a general awareness of trends in industry and trends in society. And so while I think our previous last month's session did a great job of defining AI and providing some awesome examples, in case anyone wasn't here, wasn't on the call for that last month's PD, I did want to take a second to provide a definition for generative AI. And again, this is not a technical definition because you don't need to necessarily understand all of the nuts and bolts of how it works and how it learns. But generally, generative AI is generating or can generate new text, audio, images, video, code based on content it's been pre-trained on. And this pre-training, this is tons and tons of data and modeling. And so we see these predictions essentially based on the trends of mountains of data that it's been trained on. Again, one of the pools of data that it's been trained on, there is some, is a current kind of, I'll say, complexity about whether some of our platforms like ChatGPT, whether they had legal right to train their models on, let's say, articles published by the New York Times. We'll get back to some of the limitations and some of the ethical considerations for generative AI and those tools, but really where we are as individuals and where society is are two different things. You could swear off generative AI. It might be hard to because you're swearing off those Google Maps alert that says if you want to be at work on time, you need to leave by 9:15 in the morning. It would be hard to swear it off entirely, but if you are taking a stance where you are going to completely ban it in your schools, in your classroom, you can make that decision for yourself. I would just caution making that decision for the learners that you support if you recognize that society might be moving in a different direction of acceptance. And so in order to further operationalize generative AI, I did want to spend a half a second really identifying the differences between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. And so as we reflect on that experience of visiting willrobotstakemyjob.com, one of the things that you see here is imagination and creativity. Human intelligence is actually a lot more efficient than AI systems. AI systems need tons and tons of data to learn. And humans can still use a handful of experiences or a single experience to learn. And so when we think about some of those differences between AI, artificial intelligence, and human intelligence, we can use that as the foundation of what is most important in our practice and where we should preserve as much as possible and emphasis and really telling the story and increasing our learners' buy-in around why these capabilities are important, and release them from trying to use generative AI in a way that it can't be used. And I do have an example from my particular practice that we'll look at today. And so when we think about creative thinking, internationally, we are recognizing as a global society that the importance of creative thinking is we probably undersold it. And so when we think about our major measures of learning and growth, our standardized tests, a lot of them were not very focused on trying to measure creative thinking. And what we see as tech trends come and go and new platforms arise, and now with generative AI, really an individual's ability to think creatively, create novel solutions, develop effective original solutions, and leverage the power of imagination, that is more important than it ever was before. And PISA now agrees. And so in addition to measuring the reading proficiency and mathematical proficiencies of students across the globe, now PISA is undertaking measuring creative thinking. And so if we don't recognize the global trend around emphasizing creative thought and really what the product of learning and all of our work should be, their ability to be creative and develop original and effective solutions, engage in problem solving, we should definitely recognize that the trend is shifting away from regurgitation of facts. And so will generative AI change the world? Your answer might be yes, your answer might be no. It will have an impact, but as we've seen, we will adapt and society will not crumble. And there still is a definition of what it means to be a well-prepared citizen in our world today. And so it will disrupt, maybe not to the degree that people think it will, but we can and we will adapt. We can and we will adapt the same way we adapted in our math instruction when calculators were readily available. The same way we adapted when Google launched, we will adapt. And how we adapt is really a question of our ability to analyze the ecosystem and the context that we exist in and design instruction that's relevant to that. And so one of the ways we will adapt is we will optimize our practices, the work of being an educator. We will refine it and get even more efficient. And so slides to go, a resource that I love is someone who spends most of their time creating slide decks around things. Generally, did a great survey and asked educators online what they perceive to be the main benefits of these AI tools. And overwhelmingly, the number one response was improve the day-to-day work, helping teachers use their time, saving time preparing instructional material, and being a source of inspiration. Being a source of inspiration. More specifically, one of the survey questions asked teachers to specifically identify how they use AI and generative AI. Overwhelmingly, it was some of our top responses were generate content, organize a class, or give a lesson. One of the things I love to highlight for my students when I talk about this with them is very few, you see that detect fraud, that was only 16.5%. And one of the things I like to really share with my teacher candidates at Trinity, but also any colleague in education that I have these conversations with is I would consider someone's ability to catch an improper use of generative AI, a tool like ChatGPT or Bard, to not necessarily be the best use of energy. If you think about that overworked and tired educator in the building, and I know sometimes for me, it was always a point of pride. You shall not pass. It was like this Gandalf moment if I found an instance of plagiarism. Ultimately, their ability to be productive members of society, that is the ultimate test. And so what I always say to the teachers that I support is, if it takes you more than 10 minutes, don't worry about it. Because if it's that hard to detect, then one, we do not have any quality tools that can reliably detect the use of generative AI in student writing. None of them are worth going to war over, in my opinion. But also, in the most outrageous academic integrity issues that I've been able to witness, I, weirdly or not, it might be a silver cloud person, I've always been able to find the moments to be impressed somewhat. And so if you feel like a student is being fraudulent and submitting fraudulent work, leveraging generative AI to do so, maybe there is a conversation to be had. Maybe you should look at, was this an unreasonable expectation? When you, and we'll go through an example from my own practice later, when you design authentic tasks, I actually find that it's very easy to spot when someone's work is not their own. And so when we think about all of these uses, we can consider some of the tools that support those. One resource that I like is Question Well. I have never been a quiz person. I didn't like taking them. As an English teacher, I didn't like giving them. But in moments where I did have to do an assessment or some sort and a student missed class, I recognize that in that instance, best practice was to develop an alternative assessment. Did I always have the time to? No. And so one of the things that you can use generative AI to do is to help you design some of those experiences, whether they be an assessment like this one. And here I took a video that I show my students in the technology and education course. This last semester, most of them were elementary or early childhood students, and developed this question set based off of a YouTube video that we watched. Or something a little funner, I created a scavenger hunt to model science lesson for early childhood education, and I needed clues for the scavenger hunt. And when I tell you, I consider myself an English literature person through and through, poetry is just not my jam. So I spent hours trying to create these rhyming couplets about types of animals. And I was just like, you know what? I shouldn't spend this much time on it. It is a nice to have. It's a fun activity to do a scavenger hunt, but it should not take away from the main instruction that needs to happen that day. So this was a prompt. And again, the structure of this prompt will let you know how late in the evening I was doing this planning, because I just wanted it done. I didn't even set any context, but write 3 clues for which the answer is herbivores. And so now this creative task that is a nice to have in learning, especially with our younger students, I could get to it a little quicker. And I didn't have to sacrifice the education for the entertainment. And that is always a balancing act that I always felt like I wanted to hit. I wanted students to have fun in class, but sometimes designing those fun experiences and making this and that, it could take away from the learning that I needed to document. And so I very quickly will go to a ChatGPT or a Bard for help with that particular sphere, because it serves as that nice icing on top. One of the topics we talk about is music instruction in the early childhood and elementary grades. And we talked about digital instruments. And I shared with them this awesome website. I'll put it in the chat at the end. It's a digital keyboard, and you can actually play different songs using your keyboard. And we kind of on the spot were thinking through, like, well, how would you use this if you weren't the music teacher? And one of the things that I asked ChatGPT to do was to write a song about photosynthesis based on using the melody of I'm Just Ken from the Barbie movie. And it actually created something passable. And I had learned to play those few chords on my keyboard. And so those novel experiences, if I'm teaching this scientific concept, what can I do to make it catchier, more engaging? Can I make a song about it? Can I create an interesting image about it? Those are meaningful ways that we could use generative AI as a co-planner, as a co-teacher. Some ethical considerations, because we'd be remiss if we didn't mention them. It's not without fault. Accuracy, bias issues, security issues. Samsung just laid off some employees because they had proprietary Samsung information and were just plugging it into ChatGPT, kind of throwing caution to the wind. And also intellectual property. One of the things, as an educational researcher, it is so interesting to me how ChatGPT will just create references. And so when we think about that, yes, it can help us, but we cannot rely on it too much. And we always have to be that set of eyes. Also, teaching is an art. There isn't any material, paper, book, video, anything I can just put in front of my students without following up with that human connection, that empathy, and that support. There is not a single platform, generative AI, intelligent tutor, anything that will know my students and know my learners better than I do. And ultimately, we are the models for our students. So we can't use these tools indiscriminately. We have to be able to show them, even in this instance where I used question well, trust and believe each and every one of those questions I'm going through before I even put them in front of students, because I understand best practices with assessment. This platform does not. I understand what my learning goals are. This platform does not. And I also understand how I need to design an experience, an assessment experience that meets students where they are, and this platform does not. And so leveraging generative AI, practicing with it, I have developed many a quiz that I've never actually assessed or administered to students. I play around with it all the time, professionally and personally. I did a proposal, a retitling proposal, and I drafted it myself, but ChatGPT had just launched, and I was so curious about it. I was like, let's see what they would come up with. And you know what? It wasn't the best, but they did have a point or two that I hadn't included in my original proposal for this retitling. And so its ability to be that thought partner, be that administrative assistant that all of us wish we had, that is powerful. Even if it gives us back an hour of our lives. And there is no easy way through teaching and learning. But if I can use and leverage generative AI as this teaching assistant to help me design this learning experience, no, it's not that my job is done after these 4 hours. It's that I am able to put my energy where it matters most. And that's the building relationships. And I think we'd all agree I'd rather spend time building relationships than designing assessments, because that is really where the hard work is. And so we will also differentiate. And again, I do not want to offend anyone who has a background in special education, but as I thought about the impact I saw generative AI having on my own practice, it didn't it didn't make me question the future of education. It just made me think about, okay, this is a skill. Some students have it, some students won't. Uh, but I need to differentiate for it. I need to design experiences that will be accessible no matter where you're coming from, what tools you have available. I also need to design experiences that uh, there is no completely cheat-proof task or assessment, but I needed to design experiences that would not be phased, would not be invalidated by just this new resource. So I consider it differentiating for this new student who now has a Chat GPT or a Bard in their pocket. They still deserve to be pushed and challenged in that same way. And so Oregon State University, they put out this amazing resource, and I actually went through this process of revisiting my learning goals and the learning targets that I had with tied to particular assessments, and really use this resource to think about, was I still able to get at what I was trying to measure in terms of student learning and development and growth? And so what they have is they've taken Bloom's taxonomy here, the tried and true Bloom's taxonomy. We love it, we hate it, but it's steadfast in its presence in our industry. And they made recommendations for instructors based on what level of Bloom's their learning goal was at. So for example, if you are at that apply stage, you might need to review those learning goals. Why might you need to review them? Because there are some AI capabilities that you need to consider in order to make sure you're actually able to target and measure what you're trying to measure. You can leverage generative AI to solve quantitative inquiries, math problems, those sorts of things. But what is the distinctive human skill is to test in the real world, to apply creativity and imagination. So one of the things I did with my courses is I went through those learning targets, specifically the assessments tied to them, because academic integrity is an issue. I wouldn't say it's one I lose sleep over, but I do want to ensure that the numbers that I'm collecting and the data that I have on my student learning, I try to make it as accurate as possible. And so one of the assignments that I looked at was a professional growth plan assignment. And this is something that I have my undergraduate students do. And essentially it's creating a SMART goal. Contextually, when we think about our teacher candidates, they could end up in a context where professional growth and how their impact is measured can look very different. If you're in a Montgomery County, it might be SLOs or student learning objectives, and you are creating your own goal and measuring and tracking your success towards that goal on your own. And that is married in with other assessment practices like observation and test scores. And so I wanted them to get good at developing goals. And what I found was this was kind of you could easily leverage generative AI to create a goal. And aligning it to the ISTE standards for educators didn't really do much. When I tested this assignment myself, and again, I remember first week of my assessment class in my teacher preparation program, my instructor told me you should never assign a test that you didn't take yourself. So I, as a rule of thumb, always try to use Chat GPT or Bard to complete the task that I assign, because I want to see what it would do. And one of the things that I did was I modified it to make it a little bit more contextualized. And so I took the SMART goal and made it a SMART-y goal. And I specifically found, while other things like creating the plan and establishing a deadline and how to track progress on the goal, I really found that the questions of inclusiveness and equity were where I really saw some breakdowns. And I'll put up this exemplar submission for you guys right here. This was a teacher candidate. And so when I asked them about how they could have equity as a core component to the goal that they set for themselves around technology integration, I didn't get too far before I realized, okay, this is someone else speaking. Does anyone feel like they can maybe pinpoint that moment when you feel like you're getting some chat GPT output? For me, it was specifically furthermore, and I'll use my cursor to kind of follow along, help you follow along as I read. Furthermore, I will push for practices and policies that remove structural barriers to technology access and proficiency. Examples of these include funding for schools serving low-income communities, providing professional development opportunities for teachers working with diverse students. And so one of the things that I recognized very early on, even after I moved past you need to catch every instance of academic integrity, is I found the more parameters you placed on an assignment, the easier it was to identify the point at which the student lost confidence in their own ability. Because that's why students cheat. That's why they exhibit these practices that we associate to academic integrity. This student, where they faltered was being able to connect the goal that they set to themselves to a larger societal need for equity and inclusion. And so now the conversation that I have with this student, it's not just you plagiarized, 0, academic integrity hearing, all of those things. Now it is probing this particular point where I identified a failure to exhibit confidence, maybe a failure to manage time, all of those things. And so while it is very much labor intensive, I found that the more authentic you make a task, the more you focus it in a real world context, giving them novel cases to approach. They're talking about their future selves when they enter the classroom. It is harder to leverage generative AI tools to demonstrate it's harder to leverage generative AI tools for the purpose of academic dishonesty because these aren't complex questions. In fact, this whole assignment was asking a student about themselves. But the more parameters you place on a task and the more authentic you make it, the easier it can be for you to support students' use of the technology. I do not ban ChatGPT or BARD or any of those platforms. I ask that students tell me if they use it. And so when we think about generative AI, it is sometimes both the journey and the destination. Sometimes it is the tool that you are using for learning, designing learning, but in and of itself, it is a rich content area. And we should start thinking about what are the skills that interact or intersect with our discipline. And so there is an initiative, this AI for K-12 initiative, and they're kind of doing some very interesting thought work around how do we support students with learning about this? And they have these 5 big ideas. So first, perception. Generative AI, they have a way of perceiving or developing an understanding or developing a model, I'll say. They are skilled with identifying and understanding these representations and then using them from reasoning. They learn from data, and then also they are designed in a way to try to mimic natural human interaction. And so with ChatGPT, yes, you could use code in some kind of very complex Python, all of those things to kind of yield the same output, but they made it prompt based. They made it more conversational for a reason. And then societal impact. We always have to be checking in with ourselves internally and checking in with the world to see, how is this going? What do we notice about these societal trends? And so I think this framework for me is such a meaningful way to look at what are some of the uh, skills that we need to be grappling with in our instruction. And so obviously with my background being English education, I'm very, very interested in the natural interaction, uh, the, sh- the composition of prompts. I'm interested in how generative AI uses and leverages the human language to create novel uh novel writing. But again, I almost hesitate to use that word novel because they are simply responding to patterns in large data sets and not necessarily not capable of original thought. But one of the things that a science teacher might look at is this concept of perception, and how is the technology used to perceive? If we want to think about something like uh, AI as it uh, can be leveraged in self-driving cars, and the struggle in that industry, and how self-driving cars or anything that really relies on visual perception of light and images and draws conclusion from that can sometimes fail in instances where it is dark, or instances where they are not able to recognize people based on, again, what is a limited, while very large, limited set of data. So when you think about these 5 big ideas in AI, when you think about what conversations in your class look like as it pertains to generative AI, we are thinking about, yes, the tools and getting students familiar with ChatGPT or getting them familiar with Bard, maybe leveraging tools in our own instructional design like Question Well, but it's also engaging in those complex but very rich discussions about it as a topic. And so getting to our closing, when we think about how we participate, and again, I said at the start of this, we're all here probably because we are interested in being in generative AI. We're probably those early adopters. How do we facilitate conversations? Maybe we are an island of one in the building, in the school that we serve. How do we facilitate conversations? Maybe not just participate in them. First, establish a definition. I've been in many conversations around generative AI where we were all talking about different things. I serve on the AI committee at Trinity Washington University, and there were a lot of people with a lot of degrees. I call those meetings expensive meetings because an hour of these salaried individuals' time, that's an expensive meeting. But we spent a lot of time just developing a definition, because we couldn't put out a statement. We couldn't put out a position paper on it without making sure we were all talking about the same thing. And so establish that definition. Are you talking about the same thing as this person you're in conversation with? Because as I said, generative AI can exist in a number of different contexts, and there are a number of different platforms. And some of it more scary than other. Image recognition, uh, facial recognition versus location tracking, and tools that are learning about humans by their movements. Yes, I can understand someone's fear of that, but that is a very limited definition. Share your positionality. Do you have this instrumental view, or do you have this substantive view of generative AI? And instrumental and substantive, they are terms that we use to describe views on technology generally. Instrumental, is it just a tool? Devoid of, it's just a tool? Or are we thinking it has the power to substantively change society? Those are two different viewpoints as well. And so share your positionality. I am a middle of the road person. As an instructional technologist, I exist in spaces where there is a lot of enthusiasm all the time about every new development. And I am more moderate. I ultimately believe in the perseverance of the human race, and I never think anything will save us or end us, other than maybe climate change. But I find myself in the middle. But I've been in conversations with another instructional technologist who I think just overinflates the power of some of these platforms. I one of the one of the thinking around how we support students with the leveraging generative AI is there's a suggestion that you should cite it the same way you'd cite Ralph Waldo Emerson. And my issue with that is I think it gives it too much power. It is not capable of original thought. So citing it the same way we would cite like thought giants in our history just feels wrong to me. But again, I acknowledge that positionality and I share it. And before I engage in a conversation, I own it because that's one viewpoint to have. Consider the conditions. What is happening in your building? Are you assuming similar or different context? I'm going to have a conversation with our provost on our syllabus statements around AI. The condition is our university is not going to take a firm stance. And so when I think about my context, it is different. There are some higher ed institutions who are saying it, no matter what, no matter the context, it is academic dishonesty to use generative AI on the completion of performance tasks or assessments. So what are the contexts that you're coming from? Consider those conditions. You might be having these conversations with people in a similar context to you or different. Encourage exploration. I feel wholeheartedly that I would not have a position or would not push a position in any direction if I didn't have my own lived experience of it. Again, there is a lot of fear mongering going on. There is a lot of overhyping going on. The exploration will really help you make sense of those very opposing viewpoints and opinions. And then finally, when thinking about how you facilitate these conversations, reflect, check back in with each other. What is it that is happening? What new information has been, what new updates are there? What new tools are there? Constantly recheck your opinion. Again, positionalities. Step 2, share positionality. Step 4, encourage exploration. These are ongoing conversations. And the moment you feel like you have it figured out, you should start going back and asking the same questions as you started asking all over again, because technology is ever changing. And we need to make sure that our positions, our definitions, the considerations that we have, our exploration is situated in this current context as much as we can. And so I'll open for questions here, but I'll go forward a little bit. If you don't have any questions, I want you to consider playing around with a few things. And I can put the link for all of these in the chat. So we talked about the AI K-12 initiative and those 5 big ideas. They actually have produced an amazing resource called a progression chart, where they take each of those 5 big ideas and they define what it looks like at the different grade bands. I would suggest going on their site. I can put the link in the chat, picking one of those 5 big ideas and finding your grade band, the grade band that you currently work with. What connections do you see with your content? What is this initiative saying that an 11th grader should be able to do in the context of AI, or should be able to understand? ISTE has developed some amazing resources for integrating generative AI. They have amazing projects, or list of projects based on secondary, even some for elementary. Again, most of my students this year were elementary ed or early childhood. We do have conversations with students about AI in elementary bands. We should. They are being impacted by it. And so look at those projects. Could there be one that you can take and tailor for your discipline? And then finally, and I would say this last option is definitely for us if we're kind of more introductory in this space and still trying to get an understanding of what generative AI can do or can be. This platform, the Gen AI Chat Box Prompt Library for Education, it just has a bunch of different prompts, categorized, communication, instructional design, all of these meaningful categories. Reflect on a previous lesson that you taught and explore these prompts. Which of these prompts in the library could potentially support with lesson iteration? Again, it's not for no reason that I put that reflect step as the final step with facilitating conversations in generative AI, because a core to being an educator is being a reflective practitioner. And so I know we're all engaging in this constant process of lesson iteration. And so maybe there is a way we could integrate leveraging a prompt, or maybe we can compare what this prompt, the output of this prompt versus the lesson that we designed without it, and see some interesting connections. So this is the end of my presentation. I can follow up with those links in the chat, but I'll stop my screen share and see if anyone has any questions or connections that they would like to kind of elevate for a discussion.
Wow, Professor, woo! Thank you. Thank you. This was just a wealth of information that I'm still trying to process. So it's the context of, are there questions? Yes, there's so many questions. You know, it's where do you begin to even dissect the level of complexities that you brought to us. The imagery I thought was quite compelling with regard to where do we stand in regard to this journey called AI, and from its infancy, or you know what, I've moved on, and where you stand is your own perspective, because the journey is going to happen, much like when you're monitoring finance in the stock market. Everything is just a series of patterns. So it's like, where do you begin with all of this?
Yeah, I can share. My early points were kind of just fumbling around. As I said, it was taking things that I had already produced and trying to figure out how to get a platform to replicate that. And so that was really, as I developed an understanding of how to write effective prompts that would get me the output that I wanted. A lot of it was that trial and error. Take something that I've already developed and see if I can get ChatGPT to replicate it. Because so much of people's impression of these resources sometimes can be kind of limited to, yeah, it can't do anything, it can't help me in any way. Well, you might not have used it as it was intended to be used. You might not have really recognized that it can do a lot, but I know this is a harsh way of putting this, but garbage in, garbage out. And so if you don't have something well designed, if you don't know what you're looking for, then whatever you get on the other end of it will match that. And so those were my starting points. I would just take things that I developed and see what it would give me. And once I got to the point where, okay, that output is very similar to the output that I created myself, is me, the machine, then I was feeling confident in my ability to write prompts. That was the point in time. And once I felt like, okay, I am skilled enough in prompt generation, that's when I was really able to define for myself how I could leverage this platform or how I couldn't. Again, it's my assistant. It does the sticky things that I don't like to do. It is a sounding board for me for, again, did I necessarily want to have a conversation with my colleague about my retitling? No, it was a moment of vulnerability, but this was a space where I could see what other ideas might exist in terms of this argument that I was trying to make.
I really appreciate you reframing that for me. So it seems, just what I'm hearing, AI, as you mentioned, is your thought partner. Those are the phraseology you used.
Mhm.
But in the thought partner space, it seems that there are components that you're not going to lose your job, or however you feel threatened, if you're focused on, as I saw it, I maybe added a couple of things that you had already, so wisely added. If you're focused on relationship building, if you're focused on problem solving, if you're focused on creativity, if you're focused on imagination, and if you're focused on analysis from the human perspective, then you're comfortable and should be comfortable with using AI as your thought partner, because you both play a role in the, as you called it, the journey and the destination.
Yes, exactly. And so there is, and again, it's evolving. If you ask me to do this very same thing next year, it could look entirely different. But I always maintain that currency, even if it's a quick second to, let's see this. Can I create these riddles? Can I create a song about photosynthesis based on this movie that I just watched, and this song is getting really popular, and I know my students would recognize that melody, and maybe I can connect this this wave Barbenheimer that was happening over the summer. Maybe I could connect that to this learning objective in the sciences. All of those things are meaningful, but also some of it is situated from a recognition of where my weak points are. I recognize the value of a mnemonic. I recognize the value in infusing some of those skills and leveraging music and leveraging creativity. It happens to be not my favorite thing to do. It happens to be something that can take me a very long time. And so as I think about the value that I do place on joy, the value that I do place on having fun with learning, how I have fun with learning looks very different than how some of my students have fun with learning. And so how I have fun with learning, it's making, it's designing, it's engineering, it's all of those things. I am not musically inclined, but I can use this platform to connect with a learner who is, without kind of breaking my back trying to figure out how to create rhymes for photosynthesis. And so that's really the value. It can offer a support or a scaffold in things that just aren't your sweet spot. I could also have a conversation with a music teacher to do the same thing. So I'm not going to say it can do something that is, it would be impossible for me to do otherwise, but I'm planning and I don't want it to take forever. And we don't always have work days that allow for me to walk across the hall to the music wing and work collaboratively to create this song to help students remember the cycle of photosynthesis. but I can collaborate with technology, and that is always available to me.
Thank you. I don't want to hijack all the Q&A. Is there anyone else in the audience that wants to ask some questions?
I was gonna ask, so if you had you teach a technology education course and you may use some of these tools with your students. So if someone, because a lot of our, educators here will probably want to use these, but where do you get started? Like, where would you recommend getting started first? Like I saw the one about prompts, which I think is a great idea. That's really great. But like, where would you tell someone to get started first and work their way through to maybe then implement a project or with their students, or just use it in their own professional practice?
So I started with something similar, not exactly that particular resource because it wasn't available in 2022 when all this launched, but I started by examining prompts and just looking at prompts and seeing the qualities. I remember like light as if it was yesterday, this particular article that I read, and it essentially kind of operationalized like what are the parts of a good prompt. And so I just started there, and I started just trying to replicate what other people were doing. And as I would take a prompt that I found online, I would try to change one thing first and see what happened, or change two things and then see what happened. But when I think about the work that I do and probably how frequently I use it, I will say I do a lot of creating scenarios. So in an instance where, yes, I could just read these characteristics of a good lesson to you, what I could also do is, let's see, can I get ChatGPT to create some scenarios where I can now give you practice applying things. So I like it to create scenarios. I also like, one of the things I struggled with assessment was creating the wrong answer options, because the correct answer tended to be the longest one, if I'm being completely honest. And by the time I got to option D, the third incorrect option, I was like, oh my goodness. And I would put something just ridiculously false. And what it meant was, when I then got the data from that assessment, I didn't really have answer options, even incorrect answer options, that helped me figure out where the lapse was. What was the exact point of misunderstanding? And so again, that's something small, just creating the incorrect answer options. And I would say when I was first starting out, that's about as much as I trusted it to do. I always drafted the correct option myself, but I really felt like, one, it was something I struggled with, and I always felt like it took me too much time to write slightly wrong answer options, but that targeted a particular misconception that I knew learners could have about this topic. And so it was something as simple as that. Developing questions like a question well, or helping me create scenarios so I can take what was a lower order thinking skill originally and now make it an application question. And those would be initial places that I started. Again, everyone who is starting with generative AI, they've been using it. Whether they were aware of it is the difference. But yes, the extent to which Outlook will read an email and suggest, do you need to make this an event? We're all using these platforms, or even last month in the discussion, we are using Grammarly and tools like that to edit and refine our compositions. And so if there is a simple starting point, I can go even simpler than that. One of the things that, as a leader in English education, I always understood how challenged some of the teachers in other subjects felt by the responsibility of supporting literacy objectives. And so something as simple as using, and I could put this resource in the chat, Rewordify, to create leveled text. Because as an English educator, I knew what made passages complex. And I had that training and that experience of saying, okay, this is what I need to do in order to make this text more accessible. I recognize that my peers in science education did not necessarily have that same kind of lived experience and same training. But when we look at these science assessments and some of the math assessments, the literacy skills that they require are shocking to me. And it really muddies the water in terms of what does this number measure? Because it might not be the most accurate measure of their ability to engage in scientific reasoning. So using generative AI to maybe think about what vocabulary might need to be previewed. There are amazing resources around that. Using generative AI to create leveled text. So someone who's reading at the 7th grade level and someone who's reading at the 11th grade level can both access this scientific concept, this scientific understanding. All of those are valuable because, again, I've led training on selecting artifacts for reading and how to understand text complexity. And it was something that, again, this hour PD that I have with the science and social studies department does not necessarily match the master's that I have in curriculum and instruction, specifically as it relates to literacy. And so I would say, as I think about the kind of career and technical space, the connection with literacy and supporting the literacy practices in your discipline is something that I think will make a world of difference for you, the instructor, who is feeling the burden of, okay, I didn't go into a program that taught me how to teach students how to read. What are these strategies and tools that you're telling me I should use? And also, where is the support that you're giving me to practice those things out? So I would definitely start with literacy and reading comprehension and the tools related to that.
And that's smart because when you think about like differentiation, like if I'm teaching science today, I'm not assessing reading, right? So I may not have to have you read this at grade, 11 and you're in grade 11. It may be that I'm able to create a test that meets your reading level, but I'm able to assess, hey, you know what, do you understand photosynthesis? Because that is what we spoke about. That's what we taught this week. And what are those opportunities there to make sure that we actually, because if a student is struggling with the content versus the reading, right?
Yes.
And what does that look like? Because they may know something, but they may not have the the literacy skills for you to formally really truly assess them at that level. So that's actually great because I know that's something that even when we talk about our certification exams, and unfortunately we can't change those, but as we can provide different tools and opportunities to support our students along the way, so that maybe throughout the school year we can work our way up to what grade level they need to be, because most certification exams are written on a somewhere 10th, 11th, 12th grade or adult reading level at this point. And so we do have to, consider that at some point. But while we kind of just try to make sure that we're able to have tools, because to your point, just like you're trying to create an assessment, someone can, like we can't create 4 different types of assessments for 4 different types of students in, a week and still do all the other things that we need to do. That's not humanly possible. I was gonna ask too, so I know a lot of times people wanna make sure that their AI that they're using is right. How do you verify? Like, what is your way to verify if this, what's been generated makes sense outside of your own knowledge, right? Like sometimes you can look at it and be like, that's wild. Why did you say, why did you give me that? And some days, it's kind of like, all
Well,
right, let me go back and see.
yeah, how do I verify? Well, I'll acknowledge I don't necessarily try to use it in any way where there's one correct answer. And so I'm really only, as I said, I leverage it as a thought partner. And so what that means is I usually only need to employ a thought partner when I'm engaging in complex thought. But at times when I try to use it, a few times I've tried to throw in some prompts as they relate to some of the like my research interests and kind of seeing. And then one of the things that I'll find is, as I said, in trying to do that at times, I've seen it create like a fictitious reference list. And obviously, then I can say, like, that's not an actual source that exists anywhere. Uh, at times, let's say one of the things that I recently asked it to do, so thinking back to the herbivore kind of the scavenger hunt for herbivores or types of animals. I was able to, uh, I can't remember what the characteristic was, but I did have to check that. And it was just a Google search of do herbivores actually, again, I'll own my background. I'm dealing with the science ed standard. I taught English. And so I was like, is that something that's actually true of this animal? And so that reference checking, again, when I think about the tools as a tool, a collaborative partner, a thought partner, I usually do have access to an expert in that space. But that checking is going to be a big one. And obviously the challenge, and so I will own I did not do a good job of answering your question, but I will say the challenge is preparing learners and anyone you engage around generative AI, it will make things up. And so you never can fully trust it. But even the fact checking of the output of like a chat GPT is complex because it's not making stuff up out of nowhere. As I said, these platforms aren't capable of original thought. What they're doing is like a glorified, like predictive analysis a little bit based on tons and tons of data. And so in that instance, you even sometimes when you do try to check it, you will find that website where that misinformation is present. And so all I will say is that there is a larger conversation about information literacy that has to be married with it.
That makes sense. That makes sense. No, you answered the question. That was good, and that was honest.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a good answer because it will just find, it will just find information. But, it's kind of like when people say, it's what they said, what this other person said, and what actually happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that goes along with, where we get information from, our professors, our
Mm-hmm.
teachers and everything like that too. So, there's still always this level of finding out things for yourself. But I do know people often are so apprehensive of AI because of that fear of it giving them something that's false or not
Mm-hmm.
right or etc.
And one of that exemplar that I showed you, that was a student submission from this semester. And so that student submitted that assignment. And they, again, what the checking that didn't happen there, because I don't ban the use of generative AI, but the checking that could have happened there was, okay, look back at the prompt because this is specific to your context as a new teacher. And so when you're talking about school funding policies and parameters and formulas, just like, okay, I clear as day, I can see the student plugging in the individual questions as prompts and copying and pasting the output to those individual questions. What it means, though, is they don't make sense together.
Right.
They don't
Like,
make
it
sense
wasn't a bad
together.
idea. It wasn't a wrong answer.
Yeah, it wasn't a wrong idea, but it was
It
kind
was-
of, and so when I've seen students really fail to kind of check the output of AI, it has been, is it in the proper context? Is it in the proper scope? Because we ask, with the types of questions I ask of them, you're a sophomore in college. I am not asking you to assume the perspective of an administrator, at least in this context. And so as you make a goal for yourself, and again, I push back at, there is something about the design of the assignment that the student lost confidence. And so as an instructor, I also reflect on that. But for you to be dishonest about an assignment where I asked you to talk about yourself and what you want for your future, at the end of the day, the student did fail the task because, again, it didn't make sense at all in light all of the components together. But also, I think about that Gandalf, you shall not pass moment. If this student leaves here and is okay with not developing any sort of competency with setting goals for themselves and their future, then their grade in my class is the least of their worries.
Yeah, very true.
And so when I tie my assignments to these authentic assessments, I did not give a quiz on ed tech tools and matching the name of the tool and the use, that it was all about conversations of appropriateness, conversations of relevance, conversations about safety. And at the end of the day, the level of importance that you place on those conversations and that learning, that would be indicative in your practice. Again, when we think about some of the safety and security issues, the consequences are losing your job. The consequences is legal action taken against you. And so you could, I have a Caribbean mother. And one of the things she would tell me often is those who don't listen will feel. And so in this instance, your ability to engage with assuming an ethical lens and actual curiosity and actual commitment to doing good in the world, that is enough for me. And I'm willing to support everything else if there is that growth mindset and if you're actually committed to the work of bettering our society, which as educators, that's why we do what we do. But if that's not how you feel, then that will come to light. And if you think there's an easy way through teaching, that will come to light as well. And you will be exited from the profession and hopefully without not too much harm to yourself. But yeah, so it's just like, okay, well, you're determining that you're making the decision for yourself that you don't feel like it's important to get good at goal setting. That is fine. I have to respect that. I can't care about this more than you do. What I will do is engage you in a conversation about its authenticity. I will engage you in a conversation about its significance, but I respect every single learner that I work with. And sometimes that respect means I'll let you make this decision. I'll be here when you want to check back in. You'll have to retake this course next semester. I'll be here and I will grow with you. But yeah, that fact checking, so much of it is the same fact checking I have to make when I'm like the third page in on an essay and I have to go back and I was like, am I still on topic? That's a similar process.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, does anyone else have any questions or connections, thoughts? All right, Dr. Orellana, I thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate it. We will have this recorded so that people can go back through. I have gathered all of the resources that you have provided and put them on a list. And so we usually upload this to YouTube. And so on our page, and so It'll be there recorded with all the resources and tools so that our membership can access it after the PD. So thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so much. And I greatly appreciate engaging in this conversation with, again, my peers in education. And I look forward to furthering the conversation, and don't hesitate to reach out if there's any additional support that I can offer.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.